Put God first.
Your presence in their lives gives them validation.
Our children don't need us to be superheroes.
If you do these things, the next generation and the generations that follow will live in a world far better than the one we have today.
Men, stand up, be fathers.
Welcome to the Inspired Legacy Podcast, Season 1, Episode 18. Hey guys, I'm Mark Henderson, your host and founder of the Inspired Legacy. Again, it's our mission to celebrate fatherhood, equip men to lead boldly, love unconditionally, and leave a lasting legacy. Well, today we're going to be diving into a pretty heavy topic. We are recording this in September, which is also National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And at the time of this recording, it's Tuesday, September 10th, which also happens to be World Suicide Prevention Day. Now, nearly everyone listening right now has been impacted by suicide in some way or another, yet nobody wants to talk about it. But it's really important that we do. We've got to have this conversation, and here is why. Every 12 minutes, roughly, a life is lost to suicide. That's about 117 suicides per day. For every suicide, there are 25 attempted suicides. And with nearly 43,000 suicides committed in our country each year, it's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. It's a growing problem, especially with men. In fact, men are 3.5 times more likely to commit suicide than women. And many of these guys are middle-aged fathers, which is why, again, it's important that we dive into this topic, and it's important that you're listening to this right now. Guys, today my guest is Brad Hearst. He is the founder of Survivors Joining for Hope, an organization that he founded to help those who have been impacted by suicide. And I've got Brad on the line here with me right now. Brad, welcome. How are you, man?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Oh, before we dive in, again, this is a show by dads and for dads, and so I always kind of like to qualify guys that are on the show and give you a chance to kind of give your dad bio. What have you got going on at home?
Yeah, so I got my hands full. I got three boys, three young boys. So I got a 7-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So they're all crazy. They're a handful to say the least. My wife does a good job of wrangling them in, but I do a better job of getting them wound up.
That's what dads are good at, right?
Exactly. I agree.
I always get scolded at bedtime. I tend to ramp up the energy levels when I probably shouldn't be. And
that's the perfect time to do it.
Yeah.
When else are you supposed to do it?
Well, yeah, this, like I said in the intro, this is a tough topic, but an important one. And I'm just kind of going through my mental Rolodex from the time that I was old enough to understand what suicide was until now. Honestly, I don't think I can count on both hands the number of times that I've known somebody who's taken their life. And so I guess my first question to you, Brad, is, why is this topic so near and dear to your heart? How has suicide impacted you personally?
Yep. Well, I guess when it comes to suicide loss, a little over 5 years ago, almost 6 years now, my brother, he passed away by suicide. He was a sergeant in the U.S. Army, and he was a big part of my life. He was actually adopted from Russia when he was 11. Him and I formed a tremendous bond. I was his older brother, and losing him, I felt all sorts of emotions, and it just kind of sent me in a spiral. And going through that experience and really kind of, just it was tough the first 2 years. It just created a lot of challenges for me, and I. Kind of my goal has always been to help those that have been impacted to find a little bit easier of a route. And so just losing my brother, and then actually about 2 years ago, we lost the maid of honor in our wedding. My wife lost her best friend. So not just once, but twice have been directly impacted. There's direct and secondary impacts, losses, and both of mine have been pretty direct. And so unfortunately, up until my brother's passing, it's kind of odd. I had never really been truly impacted, and it just seems like in the last several years, it's just kind of taken over. And become, unfortunately, a bigger part of our world.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it seems like as we get older, I mean, surely, obviously kids are dealing with a lot, and you hear a lot about teenage suicide, which is tragic. It's all tragic, but it does seem like the older you get, the more the more you wrestle with, the more, I guess, quote unquote baggage you carry around, and it just gets too hard for some folks to deal with.
Absolutely.
Your brother, was that you said he was in the Army? Was that like PTSD related?
So I kind of, when I talk about suicide, I kind of talk it as though it's a glass of water. There's multiple drops that add up and fill that cup up until it eventually overflows. And with my brother, yes, I think he was deployed to Iraq for several years, and then he was getting deployed again to Afghanistan. So there was definitely some PTSD relation in there. But kind of looking back on his life now, I mean, they always say that there's multiple things that lead up to it. Spending most of his life in his early childhood in an orphanage to age 11, to moving over to the United States and not knowing any English, being put into a a bedroom to share with me was a challenge. But he had struggles with alcohol, drugs, depression, and then as well as he was going through a divorce at the time. So lots of different things kind of stacking upon each other to kind of lead up to this point. And everyone always says you wouldn't imagine them this type of person that wouldn't take this action, and I would say the same for him. You never thought this would be kind of in the cards as an option for him, and so it really shocked me and caught me off guard. So to answer your question, yes, I mean, PTSD had a little bit to do with it, definitely. I think that, but there's also multiple things that added up to it.
That's a lot for anybody to handle, for sure.
Yep.
So I guess, when did you determine, you're going through the typical grief process, and you said it kind of caught you off guard, but when did that kind of dawn on you that that's what one of your purposes in life was going to be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been asked that quite a few times, and it's actually pretty easy for me to kind of pinpoint. So, like I said, my brother was in the military. We had the assistance of casualty assistance officers, or CAOs, and the military covered almost every expense that we incurred with his passing. And so, shortly after, I mean, for me, counseling didn't work, support groups weren't working, and my wife really kind of encouraged me to get out there and do something for myself. And I think for her, she thought that would be me going to the gym or doing some kind of personal activity. And it ended up me starting a foundation, because I started volunteering at the helpline in Sioux Falls, and met a lot of families who just didn't have those same resources that I had. A lot of them still didn't have memorial markers. They had to file bankruptcy because the expenses caught them off guard, and maybe it was the head of household that passed away. Some of them had to move out of their homes, relocate on top of losing that loved one. And I mean, not only did I do this, but I also worked in insurance, and life insurance was a piece of that conversation. And just meeting all these people that just went through such a larger struggle than myself really kind of pushed me over that ledge to decide it was time to do something different. And so I really wanted to emulate what the military did for me. And after meeting those people through my volunteering at the helpline, it just became clear that something was needed, and did a good amount of research and realized that there just weren't the resources out there for this type of support. And so I had to do something.
Man, I hear so many stories. You go through a season of pain, but then out of that pain, purpose is revealed, and you turned your pain into purpose. And I think that is, in and of itself, a legacy that you're leaving. And we'll dive into that specific question later on. But yeah, I think that's just a testament to your character. I think that you're able to turn it into something, and I think your brother would be proud of you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really about finding something to help me deal with my grief, and sharing my story and helping others really kind of led me down this road.
So tell us about Survivors Joining for Hope. It's a 501c3. How do you help survivors specifically, and what services do you guys offer?
Yep. So Survivors Joining for Hope, my brother's initials were actually SJH. So used his initials to kind of come up with a name. And we specifically help families after they've lost a loved one to suicide by helping with funeral expenses, grief counseling, burial fees, we'll help, with the, unfortunately, the cleanup cost. It's something that people don't like to talk about, but we do help with that as well. So financially, that's really where we provide our support, and emotionally, we help them by connecting them with other survivors of suicide loss. Our board is made up primarily of survivors of suicide loss, and we'll meet with them as early as a few hours, or anywhere in their road through their grief journey. But we provide support with them so they can find someone to relate to, because with suicide, the stigma really kind of plays a big role in the grief process, and so we try to connect them with other survivors that share a loss with them, so they don't have to worry about the stigma. They have a resource to lean on right away. And then we have our support group too. So we do provide an adult support group that meets once a month currently. We're working on developing a youth support group that'll meet along with that. So lots of different avenues that we do try to provide support for. But I think for me, the most beneficial piece is connecting with a survivor one-on-one.
Yeah, and I have no doubt you guys are in the trenches. If you are meeting with people just within hours or days, I mean, you're dealing with some pretty raw emotions. So I got to imagine you've seen a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we've had a few times where we've gotten there within an hour, and it's definitely difficult. It's not an easy process. It's when we send people out, we make sure that they're stable to handle it, because it does bring back a lot of floods of emotions to what I originally felt. So it can be really challenging, not just obviously for the family, but for the individual going out to meet with them as well. It can be overwhelming.
Oh yeah, you're just reopening those wounds, I would imagine.
Yeah, you really are. It's tough, but and we meet with families. There's some families I've been meeting with for almost 4 or 5 years now, and you start to see them grow and their grief kind of turn into more of a kind of grief into purpose, and they start to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and it brings a lot of joy and self accomplishment. So it's worth it. But up front, it's probably one of the most challenging things I've ever done.
So out of your pain came this foundation or this organization. Have you witnessed any other survivors go on and do anything of a similar nature? Have they been able to turn their pain into something that's going to, in turn help others? Or I guess everybody kind of deals with it differently. I'm just kind of curious if that's a trend.
A lot of people have volunteered and started, become a piece of our organization. That kind of seems to be the trend that we experience is, we help them, and then in turn they want to help us once they get to the point where they feel like they can emotionally handle it. I would say I've seen a few people that have created scholarship funds, kind of in honor of their lost loved one, and some have gone on to create blogs or even podcasts to kind of share their mission and story. It's a process. I mean, it's pretty unique where, for some, if it's maybe not it's not a direct loss, it was a friend or kind of a coworker, it's a little bit quicker of a grief process. So but maybe the passion isn't there, where with the families that we meet that are directly impacted, it's a much longer process. So it can be anywhere 3, 5, 10 years before they're even comfortable talking about it. So it's difficult to kind of just jump right in. But I mean, I have seen several instances where people we've worked with have almost immediately started wanting to help and work with us and kind of share their story, and some of them have jumped in and even done videos for us where they've done testimonials to share their stories so we can connect those with other survivors. So definitely have seen people help out and push their own grief into kind of turning that around and helping others.
Yeah, I watched one of those stories on your website, and it was informational at the least. I mean, I just kind of lifted the hood, so to speak, in terms of the grief process and what to expect if you were to ever, God forbid, go through something like that. You mentioned stigma earlier, and I think you're right. I think there is a stigma around suicide. Like I mentioned at the top, they don't like to talk about it, or like is the wrong word, but people are reluctant to talk about it. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's because it's sort of an offshoot of, or sort of lumped in with like mental illness, which has its own stigma? Why is it that you think that people just don't want to address this issue?
I think there's a few different reasons. I think the main one is it's related to mental health, and mental health is kind of where cancer was 20, 25 years ago. It's people still view it as a sign of weakness, and especially men. We talk about men being the kind of the key component of suicide loss. They make up such a large percentage of it, and we still kind of have that persona of asking for help means you're weak.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably one of the largest reasons that people don't want to talk about it is since the male population makes up that. And my brother, for example, being in the military, I think that adds another layer of difficulty to talking about it, because you don't want to be perceived as the weak link in the chain,
Right.
Especially when you're being deployed or being in that sort of situation. But I think we really got to make sure that we are talking about it, because it doesn't mean you're weak. Asking for help can almost mean, in my opinion, that it's a sign of strength, that you're
Right.
self-aware and really know that it's time to find that support. So it's that alone, I think, is probably the biggest reason we don't talk about it. But it's really just like any other disease. I mean, mental health. You think about depression, bipolarism, schizophrenia, or even you bring in some of the, alcoholism, opioid addiction. There's lots of things that can lead up to it. Anything, even just the stress of a job, can be the reason that people kind of take this action. And it's unfortunately we don't talk about it, but it needs to change. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I think you touched on a perception that's out there that seems to be so prevalent amongst just society in general, but especially men, that there's this feeling that we have to be stoic, right? And put on a brave face. And I tend to believe that, like you said, there's strength in asking for help. There's strength in being vulnerable. And I think it's important that guys have a network of friends that they can lean on if they're ever feeling like they're struggling with stuff. And I think that guys either don't have that, or maybe they do. And they go back to that preconceived notion of, well, it's not manly for me to speak up about this and admit that I'm dealing with this issue in my life. And I'll just put on a brave face. And before you know it, it's too much for you to bear. And if you get caught in a weak moment, then that's when tragedy happens, I think.
It's especially important for myself having boys. It's just trying to teach them that it's okay to ask for help, and you can still be strong while showing vulnerability. It doesn't mean you have to be strong 24/7. I think it's really making them understand that they're still pretty young, but that's going to be part of my drive and my mission for this organization, is them to see them that it is okay to ask for help, and to teach their friends it's okay to do the same.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I kind of try to drive that point home with my son as well. Like, even though he's only 10, knowing he's, got middle school around the corner, then high school, and they're going to be faced with all kinds of pressures and decisions. And I tell him, buddy, you can talk to me about anything. And when I say that, in my mind, I'm thinking, girls and drinking and sex and all that stuff. But at the same time, I think it's important for dads to also include in that conversation, like, your feelings. How are you feeling, buddy? Are you depressed? Are you sad? How are you handling your emotions? And really staying in tune with that side of everything that kids are dealing with today.
Right. And I guess the big thing we don't realize too, that I've been discussing a lot lately, is bullying becomes a big part of their world. Well, we think about bullying, just tell them to kind of deal with it and get over it. Well, we see a lot of, currently with our organization, a lot of younger kids passing away by suicide because of bullying. And parents, we tell them to be tough, move on, deal with your issues. But when I was a kid, I got to leave school at 3:00 and turn things off, and social media wasn't an issue, where I didn't have cell phones. Now it's kind of 24/7 for them. So it's just not as easy as turning it off, because, they have that constant connectivity.
Yeah. And I think that as parents, we're still figuring out how to parent our kids through that, through that distraction. I think it just comes down to teaching them how to have a healthy relationship with that stuff. And maybe that does mean just holding your ground and saying no to a smartphone until they're much older than they would like to be before they have it.
That can be challenging in itself.
It is. It is an uphill battle almost daily. But I think it's worth it, because, like you said, it's 24/7, and they literally cannot escape it. And if they get bullied at school, they come home and they're getting bullied while they lay on their bed in the safety of their own home. And that's tragic. From your experience through your organization, let me back up. Go back to the stigma thing. So, knowing that there is a stigma, can you have you recognized maybe a way around that? Like, how do we overcome that stigma? Is it just simply having more conversations, or is there something more practical that we can do, especially as men?
Is there a way? I think it's really just talking about it. Kind of making that conversation more, I guess, just part of our normal lives, making it less awkward. AFSP has a program they're talking about now, calling "Embrace the Awkward." Talk saves lives. So I think that's kind of your first stepping point is really trying to find a way to just talk through it and really make that a part of our lives. We talk about cancer like it's not an issue. We'll talk about diabetes, kidney disease, but we really won't talk about depression, bipolarism, suicide. So I think just kind of having that conversation. It's for myself. I mean, it was an awkward conversation at first. It was uncomfortable. I didn't know what I'm doing, and now it's the point where my wife almost has to tap me because I'm making people uncomfortable because I don't realize I'm so comfortable talking about it. So I mean, for me, that's kind of really how I eliminated the stigma for myself. Is you just kind of got to put the stigma aside and then just go with it and deal with it and kind of grind it out. I think that's really kind of the best course of action for everybody, male, female. Doesn't really, it impacts everybody. There's no segregation. There's no division there. It impacts all walks of life, from poor to the wealthy. Every gender, every race. So it's that's kind of your grounding, your starting point. I think is just making that awkward conversation normal.
Yeah, I think you're right. And my hope is that as we learn more and more about mental health in general, that the younger kids today are learning more about mental health and the things that come along with that, the risks that are associated with that, and that will just become more deeply ingrained in their vernacular. And so as they grow into be the next leaders, of our country, that will just be more of a natural dialogue. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's my hope.
I agree.
Anyway. That's my hope.
Well, there's a big fear about it now that if you talk about it more, you're going to increase the chances of it happening. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, if you go back to the days of Kurt Cobain, I mean, Seattle actually saw a reduction in losses by suicide when he passed away versus an increase. So there's different studies out there that report each one, but I think you really just got to kind of hit it hard.
That's interesting. I didn't know that about Seattle.
Yeah, there's been a couple of studies. I've seen more that say that there was a reduction. So it's, I truly believe it does help.
What impact do you think suicide has on family and loved ones? And I know they're the obvious answers that we've already touched on, but I'm thinking of like maybe the not so obvious.
Speaking from my own experience and what I've observed as through the foundation is it can actually rip families apart. You would think your family is there as a support structure, and especially when it's kind of the fathers make up a big chunk of it. Unfortunately, that's male head of household passing away, and it was the same situation for my brother. He had a son. He was married, going through a divorce, but one of the biggest things you don't realize is that really rips apart kind of his wife. For us, we no longer have a relationship. There's no conversation being had there, and so I get next to no communication with my nephew, which is a bit of obviously a disappointment because he's my last kind of remaining connection to my brother. That's probably one of the biggest things that you see is families get divided and relationships are lost, and unfortunately that's a big piece of it. You'll see another person in our organization, she lost her husband, and the in-laws became completely separated. There was issues over grandchildren. It's really kind of the kids of the parents that are passing away that also get impacted, and now they're already losing a father or a mother, and to lose the grandparents is just another level of loss, and that support structure that you would normally think that you have going through such a tragic situation is now gone. So that's probably the biggest piece that I've ever seen that people don't really think about. Obviously there's the monetary issues. It's, maybe life insurance doesn't pay out because of the cause of death. There's exclusions inside there. I work in life insurance, so maybe it happens in the first 2 years of purchasing it, or the corporate policy doesn't pay out. So then you end up with nothing, thinking you have something, and obviously the monetary challenges come into play, which is where we try to step in and help.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of where I was headed with that question, is the fringe impacts that it has, and that word maybe belittles the significance of it, but like you said, the in-laws, and especially the kids, and I just think of the generational impact that suicide can have. Like you mentioned, if you have and I guess your nephew is going to be in the same boat, your parent, your dad takes his life, you grow up without a father, that's the obvious impact, but then what outlook on life do you have? I mean, it just taints your entire outlook on life. And then you question, well, is that going to be my fate as well?
Right.
And then that child then grows up and maybe has his own kids and maybe passes those thoughts on to the next generation. And it's just sort of a chain reaction.
Yeah. It's things you don't think about. I have another gentleman I know who, he lost his father when he was 4, and went his entire life. And then, eventually lost one of his siblings as well. And he's now an only child, never really had a father. And he's grown up to be very successful, but he's talked about some of the challenges that he's faced throughout his life and the questions it's presented to him. And you think it's something that you can just kind of get over, but that stays with you forever. It's not something that just goes away. You can't take a pill. You can't necessarily take away those emotions and those challenges that you face because of that.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody right now who's maybe recently lost a loved one to suicide?
I would just, there's still hope, there's support out there. You can feel lost and abandoned, because initially you're in a cloud, you're in a fog. The first, 2 to 3 months is just some of the most challenging. We have a lot of support right away, with the upcoming funeral. But once that funeral happens, you feel kind of alone and abandoned. And there's, find that other survivor, find that support structure, kind of find someone that's comfortable with that conversation. It's going to be difficult because a lot of people aren't, but if you can truly find another survivor of suicide loss, that's kind of for me, was my first step towards my recovery through my grief process. Because now, instead of being awkward, I had someone who could understand and relate. So there is hope out there. Survivor Joining for Hope, we'll connect you with a survivor. I love meeting with families. I don't know, love's not the right word, but enjoy meeting with families and providing them that support and helping them through their grief process. So you're not alone. There's definitely help out there. And then it doesn't necessarily get easier, but it gets more normal. I guess it's never easy.
Yeah.
But there is support, and don't think you're alone, because there's plenty of people out there who have experienced the same thing. And like you said, it's impacting more and more people every day.
And in the intro, I mentioned that, this is a growing problem, especially among father-aged men. So, Brad, what would you say to any guy listening to this right now who has maybe thought about or contemplating suicide himself?
That's a challenging question. Obviously, I'd tell them, reach out for help. You don't have to hold it in. As a father, we want to be kind of stoic. We want to be that perfect model for our boys and our daughters, and just kind of being that example for them, of showing that it's okay to ask for help. We always tell them to ask for help when they need us to assist them with something. But as a father, it's important to kind of emulate those actions, and so reach out for help. Get that support. Your kids need you. It might be challenging today, but life without you is much worse. It would be just much worse for your children. So it's find that hope. Know that you're not alone, and put kind of your own comfort aside and get the support that you need.
So I know that you work in the insurance business and you help people with life insurance, and legacy is a part of that whole conversation. And people have traditional things come to mind when they think of a legacy and leaving a legacy. But when you think of an inspired legacy and you want to leave an inspired legacy for the next generation, what does that mean to you? What does that phrase, an inspired legacy, mean to you?
I think it's really about almost kind of being the change. For me, with losing my brother, and then losing the matron of honor, and being impacted twice by suicide, it is really about changing our perception on the world and what is kind of normal and what's, right and wrong. Asking for help, like I said multiple times now, isn't a weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign of self-awareness. And kind of with survivors joining for hope, creating that legacy for my brother, and any survivor, giving them a place to go. So I think it's about recognizing that you need help, creating a place to get that help, and really inspiring that next generation coming up to know that they're not alone and this is normal and it's okay to, get that help, because again, we want you here. We need you here. You never know, that person passing away might be the person that creates a cure for cancer or finds, that next cure for that disease. But it's just, so for me, it's about creating that generational legacy for me.
That's awesome. Brad, I want to thank you for the work that you do, and I want to thank you for your time. It's a hard topic for a lot of people to talk about and listen to, but hopefully people have hung around and listened to what you had to say. I think, again, it's a really important topic, so thanks for your time today.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate being here, and it's a great show, so thank you for having me on.
You heard Brad and I talk about the stigma of suicide and mental health. And guys, I'll be totally honest, I'm not comfortable talking about this stuff. I hope it didn't come through in that conversation, but I get it. It's uncomfortable. I know a lot of times when we have to stare in the face of raw emotion, whether it's our own or somebody else's, I think our natural tendency is that we want to turn away, right? Because it's messy. So if we can avoid that feeling, we will. But like I mentioned at the top of the show, it's becoming an epidemic, suicide. And I think in some cases, social media, especially for kids, it's acting as a magnifier to some of the contributing factors of anxiety, depression, and suicide. And if we're not willing to face these issues head on as men and leaders of our families, then we might as well hide our heads in the sand. We've got to be willing to get over our fears of talking about this stuff and do what we need to do to either get help for ourselves or be willing to help somebody else that we know who is stuck in the valley. So I wanted to time this show during September, like I mentioned earlier, because it is National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, but I also knew it was something that I personally needed to do. I needed to force myself to talk about this specific issue because I don't want to be part of the stigma that's out there. And again, as leaders of our family, we can't be part of the problem. We've got to be part of the solution. So I guess my point to this is talk with your friends and your family. Check in on them. Ask them how they're doing. Let's be willing to put ourselves out there and encourage and support our fellow brothers. And speaking of encouragement and support, if that's something that you feel like you need, if you're in need of or have been searching for like-minded men to surround yourself with, to confide in and lean on, then I humbly invite you to check out our closed Facebook group. It's free, it's a safe space, and it's full of other guys committed to helping others grow spiritually and to equip each other to tackle life's ups and downs. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, you can find a link to this group in today's show notes. Again, guys, this topic, it's so important, and the work Brad and his team are doing over at Survivors Joining for Hope, it's simply it's a message that more people need to hear about and know about, and you can help do that by sharing this episode with your friends, your family, and your coworkers. Share it on Facebook, share it in an email, shoot it to somebody in a text. It's super easy, takes like 2 minutes, but it's extremely effective. Now for some exciting news, you guys, some of you anyway, might remember Promise Keepers. It was, I think, founded back in like 1990. It was a ministry for men. And at the time, it exploded to become one of the biggest movements in the history of the church. But over time, it faded away to the point where today, I think if you would ask any young man about Promise Keepers, they've probably never even heard of it. But Promise Keepers, it's coming back. And in my next episode, you're going to hear my conversation with Ken Harrison. Ken is the chairman of the board for Promise Keepers and is leading the charge to usher the ministry into a new era. Ken is also the author of a new book titled Rise of the Servant Kings, What the Bible Says About Being a Man. And guys, when it comes to the category of Christian living for men, it's one of the best scripture-based books that I've read in a long time. And I've enjoyed it so much that I'm giving away a free copy. But the giveaway is happening over on Instagram, so if you're not already, follow the show on Instagram at The Inspired Legacy. There's a link in the show notes. And when you follow me there, I'll be posting throughout the next few weeks on how you can become eligible to win a free hardcover copy of Ken Harrison's new book titled Rise of the Servant Kings, What the Bible Says About Being a Man. It's an awesome book for guys, and I can't wait to give it away. All right, guys, that's it for this episode. Thanks again for listening. And again, subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode, because when we work together to lift up fatherhood, we're going to change the world one dad at a time. Until next time, live inspired.